Welcome to another episode of The Evaluation Couch, the podcast where we talk about career growth and the field of evaluation. This is your host, Maria Montenegro. I'm excited for this episode because this episode has been on my list ever since I came up with the idea of The Evaluation Couch. Releasing this episode is going to be a huge milestone and it feels so good. But I have to admit that I'm also conflicted and I have a lot of emotions around this episode. Becoming a credentialed evaluator was key in my career journey. And I feel like I also owe it to my listeners and to the many people that have reached out and have asked me questions about becoming a credentialed evaluator to give them an honest perspective of what my experience and my opinion is. I also want to give others what I wish I would have known and considered before becoming a credentialed evaluator. For those that don't know me, my evaluation journey started when I was working in a college doing research in a program for immigrants and refugees to Canada. I was using my training from my applied economics degree, but I had never heard about evaluation until I was assigned an evaluation framework for the entire program. My supervisor supported me to attend the Essential Skills Training course by the Canadian Evaluation Society. And this course is basically an evaluation one-on-one. It was designed for people that have never really been exposed to evaluation. And it covers the foundations of evaluation, its objectives, what the evaluation process entails, developing logic models, and so on. This was also a very cool opportunity. It was pre-pandemic times. So I actually got to take this course in person. And my facilitator was Shelby Courtley from 3 Hive Consulting. Shelby has actually been a guest in the Evaluation Couch. And if you've heard her speak about evaluation, you know that she's so passionate about it. So I don't know if it was Shelby, if it was the curriculum, but ever since I took this course, I knew that I wanted to become an evaluator. In that training, Shelby mentioned the credentialing process of the Canadian Evaluation Society and shared that she was a credentialed evaluator. She talked about what the process entailed and acknowledging that becoming an evaluator was going to be a huge journey for me since I was in the first step towards this. I decided from that moment on to become a credentialed evaluator. Before sharing more about my experience applying for it, how it has helped me or not helped me in my career, I want to provide some context setting for those people that maybe are a bit confused or not as familiar with this credentialing program. If you are a little bit lost, don't worry. This is a specific program from the Canadian Evaluation Society. So if you live outside Canada, it is very likely that you haven't heard about it, and that's completely fair. And even if you are in Canada, it's completely okay if you're wondering, what is this credentialization? Why do we even have this in evaluation? You wouldn't be alone in asking yourself these questions. I have to admit that I know so much more about this topic now after being in the field for a few years, after talking to many people about their careers, and also I learned a lot just by preparing for this episode. I'm first going to give you an overview of what the credentialization program is, where it falls in our evaluation profession discourses, and why it's even a thing. Before I'm actually able to speak to that, I need to talk about professionalization of evaluation. The Credentialed Evaluator Designation Program falls within efforts to professionalize evaluation as a field. Professionalization is a journey or a process to provide stature or recognition to a specific action or profession. The hope is that through this process, we contribute to higher performance of this specific profession and that the public is equipped with knowing how to judge high quality or high performance within this field. Professionalization within evaluation is focused on bringing stature and recognition to evaluation as a profession. It involves giving structure to the knowledges, the values, attitudes, and behaviors within the profession of evaluation. So when we talk about professionalizing evaluation, we're talking about making it explicit and clear what doing high-quality evaluation looks like, what being an evaluator looks like. And we're also talking about bringing structure so that evaluators have that understanding as well as the public. In one of the resources that I use for this episode, which is linked in the notes, the author describes 5 ingredients needed for professionalization. And these ingredients are: 1. National evaluation ecosystems. This looks at the current situation that defines whether professionalization is feasible or not. This ingredient also looks into whether there's demand for this profession and whether there's people that can meet this demand. It also looks at whether a problem has been identified around the lack of professionalization, and if there is support within the field to actually put professionalization processes in place. 2. Mechanisms for professionalization. So how that professionalization is going to be implemented. There's a few different things that come into play here, and these include ethical guidelines, standards of practice, competency schemes or frameworks, promotions of these guidelines, standards, and schemes, and a recognition system, or a process that recognizes competent practice. The third ingredient is change process. 4th, resources that are actually used to put in place the professionalization and enact this plan. And when all of these pieces are together, there's a grounded plan to implement and professionalize something like evaluation. So when we think about credentialization, it comes into the recognition system, which is meant to be implemented as a way of recognizing what competent practice within the field looks like. One thing I want to note is that within these recognition systems, though, there's a range of different activities and processes. Credentialing is founded on the assessment of one's competencies against established competency statements as demonstrated by training, experience, or performance of their work. There are other types of recognition systems, such as certifications. Academic degrees can sometimes be a recognition system in certain professions. And in other professions, you will see things like licensing, which is required for someone to be able to practice. And the key takeaway from this overview of professionalization is that the credentialing program is a part of a larger effort for professionalizing the field of evaluation. There's a lot more to professionalizing evaluation as a field than this specific recognition system. And I think it is important to recognize this and where this is situated in the larger conversation, because you will be exposed to debates around credentialing or professionalization of evaluation. There are people that are critics of the credentialing program as it currently stands, of the idea of implementing similar programs in other parts of the world. At the same time, there are many efforts globally to strengthen professionalization of evaluation, including strengthening training, strengthening awareness of competency frameworks. There are also efforts to strengthen evaluation practice within national evaluation systems. What I think is important to recognize is that when you hear about debates and divergent views in relation to the credentialing process, it is not necessarily a debate on professionalizing evaluation. It could be. There could be pros and cons to professionalizing evaluation in general, but I think there is a lot of opinions about the credentialing process that might not extend to professionalizing in general. That leads me to what these debates are. I have to admit that when I was an aspiring evaluator in that essential skills training, I had no idea about the debates for and against this Credentialed Evaluator designation program. I had no connections with the Canadian Evaluation Society. I had very little exposure in general to evaluation networks. So this was a topic that I wasn't exposed to until after I became a Credentialed Evaluator. The reality is that not everyone agrees with this program, even within Canada. And I do want to bring emphasis to the fact that this is a program that is exclusive for the Canadian Evaluation Society and mostly known within Canada. There's a document that I'm going to add in the episode notes that actually summarizes the different views and concerns that were raised in the development of the credential designation process, which highlights some of these perspectives. And I'm going to just give you a quick summary of what some of those arguments are. When it comes to arguments against it, there are some fears that implementing this program or a similar one can be a barrier for innovation within the field and can marginalize context-specific approaches to evaluation. Some fears have been raised about the credentialing process concentrating power among certain groups and creating barriers of entry for other practitioners. This is especially important considering that there is a cost required to apply to become a credentialed evaluator as well as to maintain your designation. Another argument against is that some people are not convinced that this program or professionalization in general is actually going to address the root problems that the field of evaluation faces in terms of how it is acknowledged, appreciated, valued, or understood in our society. But ultimately, it was implemented because there's also some people that really see the value in this and that have arguments for it. Some of the arguments in support of it are that it will enhance credibility and the quality of evaluation by establishing standards and ethical guidelines, and by having a process by which people demonstrate that they have met this, which can ultimately lead to increased rigor of evaluations. Another argument for is that it can increase the trust that the public places in our profession and move towards more consistent practices. Another of these arguments is that it will actually support the workforce development of evaluators by clarifying what the competencies are and then using these to improve training programs. So in general, the arguments claim that it can elevate the status of our field, attract talent, and secure better compensation for evaluators. The Credentialed Evaluator Designation Program was implemented by the Canadian Evaluation Society in 2010. To my knowledge, there is no other organization in the world that has implemented something similar. And it's been around for a few years, so there have been some changes in terms of the requirements to become a credentialed evaluator. There's been a few evaluations of the program, and some of the findings of those and the recommendations of those evaluations have been used to inform changes. And what I'm going to do is, just for context setting, give you a brief overview of what is entailed in the process. I want to make it very clear that I'm not representing the Canadian Evaluation Society in any way. I always encourage you to go to their website. You will find their link in the episode notes, and to check the requirements to make sure that you're seeing the most up-to-date and accurate information. What I'm going to share next is just meant to give context for the rest of the episode. To become a credentialed evaluator, you need to show that you have met a level of competency to be an evaluator and to do high-quality evaluation. And there's a few requirements for this. The first one is around education. You have to have a graduate degree, master's or PhD level, that is recognized in Canada. If you have studied outside Canada, there are processes to have that be acknowledged in this country. I would recommend that you go to the link and read what that looks like. In terms of experience, the requirement is that you have at least 3 years full-time equivalent of evaluation-related work within the last 10 years. Lastly, you need to show that you have met 70% of the evaluation competencies in each of the 5 domains of competencies for Canadian evaluation practice. So this is using the competency framework of the Canadian Evaluation Society. You can also find a link to those in the episode notes. Within this requirement, although you have a choice over which competencies to use to fulfill that 70% requirement, there are 2 competencies that you are required to show you have met, and those are competencies 1.1 and 1.3. Competency 1.1 is knows and considers the application of evaluation theories and models, and stays informed about new thinking and best practices. Competency 1.3 is integrates the Canadian Evaluation Society's stated ethics in professional practice and ensures the ethical oversight is maintained throughout the evaluation. So what you need to do in the process of applying for the designation is you have to write a narrative of a maximum of 150 words for each of these competencies, which requires you to be quite concise. 150 words sounds like a lot, but it's not. In this narrative, you talk about how you have met, and you provide clear examples that basically try to convince someone reading your application that you have met this competency. Once you submit your application, 2 members of the credentialing board, who are experienced evaluators, will review your application and determine whether you have met the requirements or not. If you have met the requirements, you become a credentialed evaluator. If you haven't met the requirements, then my understanding is that they provide feedback and you have an opportunity of resubmitting your application within a specific period of time. Once you become a credentialed evaluator, to keep your designation, you have to remain a member of the Canadian Evaluation Society and you have to pay a renewal fee of 50 Canadian dollars. You also have to submit every 3 years a narrative explaining how you have met 40 hours of professional development. This is actually quite broad. You can use self-learning, conference attendance, trainings, webinars, anything that you use to learn and improve your skills, you can put into these 40 hours. So it actually doesn't end up being a lot because it is over a 3-year period. So now that I have offered that context setting and hopefully you have a better idea about what this Credentialed Evaluator designation program is, I'm going to share a bit of what this journey has been for me. So from that moment that I decided that I impulsively decided that I was going to become a Credentialed Evaluator, working through the process and the requirements really helped guide my career and help me make decisions. When I realized that one of the requirements was meeting that work experience, I realized that in my current position I was doing institutional research and part of my job was doing evaluation. It was going to take me many years to meet that requirement. That informed my decision to look for a job where I could be working on evaluation full-time. In my latest episode 34, Growing Your Career with Evaluation Competencies, I really describe in depth what the process of working through the competencies for the Credentialing Evaluation Program helped me develop a career development plan, make the process of becoming an evaluator less overwhelming, and identify priorities and competency areas that I really needed to focus on. So I encourage you to hear that episode if you're interested in learning more about that. This process was extremely valuable and really is the reason why I am in the place where I am today. And I have to admit that if it wasn't because I was applying for the Credentialed Evaluator designation program and I had this goal, it would have been really hard to get the motivation to work through this. Writing the narrative for all of the competencies is time-consuming. It's not something that people would just do for fun. I've actually been in quite a few meetings at the Canadian Evaluation Society conferences where people talk about this program and ask questions, and they're trying to learn more. And I know that many people face challenges with the narrative writing process. I enjoyed the fact that it forced me to reflect on myself, on my skills, to plan. But I admit that it's not something you would do for fun because it is quite time and labor intensive. And I think another valuable thing that the process of becoming a credentialed evaluator gave me in the early stages of my career was the ability to communicate clearly to my employers around what my goals were, to demonstrate that I was committed to the field of evaluation and to my professional growth, and to ask the support that I needed to get there. And I think that when you are able to be clear and communicate effectively with your supervisors, with your mentors, or with your clients, depending on where you are, if you're a consultant or if you're an employee, being clear on what you want and communicating that not only demonstrates that you have clarity, but it also helps you secure supporters and cheerleaders that want to see you succeed. It helps them be able to more effectively help you because you have an idea of what you need, so you're directing them. When I joined my second job, the consulting nonprofit organization where I was doing evaluation, in one of my first meetings with my supervisors, I communicated to them that I was working towards becoming a credentialed evaluator and shared what competencies I needed to strengthen. I had more than one supervisor in this organization, and the responses I got whenever I would bring up the Credentialed Evaluator program were different depending on who my supervisor was and the competency that I was working on. Sometimes this led me to receive support to attend specific trainings, conferences that were linked to the competencies that I needed to strengthen. Other times, the responses made me question whether I was in the right place. To give you an example, I clearly remember that one of the competencies that I needed to work on was working with budgets and managing budgets. And when I shared this with one of my supervisors, the response that I got was that only senior people work on budgets, so they weren't going to be able to help me with that. I am a manager right now, and I can think of so many ways in which I can provide learning opportunity to someone interested in stretching their skills a little bit, even if they're not at a senior level where I can give them full accountability over it. It can look like you can work with someone and learn from them by observing what they do. You can take a course on that topic. You can be matched with someone that is more experienced and learn about how they apply it in their work. You can support part of, for example, managing a budget so that you can start getting exposure to that topic and start building your skills. There are so many different ways in which you can develop competencies. And I remember that the moment I received that response from my supervisor, the story that I made up was that organization wasn't invested in my growth. And I think that life is too short to be in a place like that and to feel that way. Once I moved to another organization, I did the same thing. On week 1, I communicated that it was my goal that I was working on. I shared the competencies that I needed to strengthen. And thanks to that, I had their support. I had been talking about it for so long that they knew it was a big deal. Even though they didn't fully understand what it was, I think I was probably one of the first people in the whole organization to become a credentialed evaluator. There was always this education component to it, but my supervisor was so proud and supportive that she sent an email when I received my designation, and whenever she would introduce me to executive leaders, she would mention that I'm a credentialed evaluator. I felt a lot of support and recognition for the true milestone that this represented to me. So those have been some of my experiences in the workplace, the ways that it has benefited me in terms of guiding my career development, communicating my goals with my employers, and also helping me learn whether the workplaces where I was were actually invested in me. I've had my Credentialed Evaluator designation for over 3 years now. And when I look back and try to think of the tangible benefits that having this title has brought me, I have to admit that sometimes it's nice to have this title. When I've applied to a few requests for proposals with other consultants, I've been told that it's important, that it's a plus. I recently met someone and they shared that they would be more inclined to receive career coaching from someone who is a credentialed evaluator, so that was interesting. I also had my Credentialed Evaluator title thrown into a funding application once to make the team sound more apt to do an evaluation, and the application was successful, so I think that's a good thing. Other than that, I don't think I can identify specific tangible results from becoming a Credentialed Evaluator. Now, I have stayed within the same organization since I became a Credentialed Evaluator. I have applied to a few requests for proposals with other consultants, but I'm not a consultant full-time. What I have seen is that sometimes these funding calls will say that they give a preference to people with Credentialed Evaluator designations. Again, really want to emphasize this is in Canada. I've never seen something internationally with this type of description in terms of the assets of the position. And I also have been in my organization, right? So I haven't been applying for jobs actively. So I think all of that has meant that I haven't necessarily had the opportunity to see the tangible results of becoming a credentialed evaluator in terms of career opportunities. We're all evaluators, and we know that it's not only tangible outcomes and tangible results what really matters. I think there's a piece that I don't often see discussed when we talk about the Credentialed Evaluator Program that at least has played a role in my career. This topic has been very present in my mind because I've been reading a lot. I've been connecting with evaluators who are frustrated in their careers, and it's just a topic that is so prevalent. The imposter syndrome and the insecurity and the self-doubting within our field is so chronic. And in all honesty, it's so sad. In the last few weeks, I've been in presentations where people are presenting evaluation work, and the amount of times that I've heard people say things like, I'm not an expert, or I'm not really an evaluator, but I just did this amazing evaluation that I'm presenting on a public webinar. It's just so crazy to me to think about how many people that are equipped to do useful and informative and very much needed evaluations are self-doubting themselves in the process. And when I think about my career and that moment when I was in the essential skills training and I knew very little about evaluation, but yet I was willing to commit my whole career to it, I think what actually made me stick to that plan of becoming a credentialed evaluator, I think it's related to this. It's related to the fact that I had self-doubt and I was so insecure. I knew that I didn't have post-secondary training in evaluation. When I started joining evaluation events and conferences, I started being exposed to academics that use very fancy language that I still to this day do not understand. Let's use plain language, people, please. I started listening to these complex comments about theory and approaches. I started hearing these names being dropped into conversations with the expectation that I should know who they are because they are gurus in our field. So the more I was becoming ingrained in the evaluation community, the more reasons I had to doubt my place in it, and the more gaps of knowledge I identified in myself. And I think that the Credentialed Evaluator title appealed to me as a way of saying, I am worthy of being in this space. I am worthy of calling myself an evaluator, even though I'm already doing evaluation and I'm doing a good job at it according to what people that work with me say. But this will give me the credibility that I do not feel inside of me yet. If I'm being very honest, being able to call myself a credentialed evaluator maybe help with this a little, but not really. It was nice when I was able to make a LinkedIn post about it, and when my supervisor sent that email. I felt more equipped and qualified for the job that I was already doing, but that only lasted for a very short time. I think the process of becoming a credentialed evaluator, meaning the process of working through the competencies, that played a role in me feeling like an evaluator. But the actual title of a credentialed evaluator played a very minimal role. It was more my internal work, investing in myself, developing my competencies, doing coaching, leading a team and stretching myself in different ways. All of my voluntary involvement in Eval Youth really helped me turn that narrative and framing of myself. And the reason why I wanted to share this, I know that you probably weren't expecting going into these deep topics in this episode, but at every Canadian Evaluation Society conference that I have attended, there's a session around the credentialing process. When I went to New Brunswick in 2024 for the conference, there was a session on this topic and the room was packed. There were so many people and great questions, and I really love that the Canadian Evaluation Society puts up these sessions. For context, everyone around the credentialing program is volunteer, and these people are amazingly talented, committed people that really just want to see our field recognized and our field to flourish within Canada. I have a lot of respect for these people. But there's this session and it's packed full of people. And one thing that I do not love is the insecurities and the imposter syndrome that shines through the questions that are asked. And I really wonder if some of these people are interested in the Credentialed Evaluator designation because they are facing what I used to face. If they are, I just want to offer a perspective that I don't think becoming a Credentialed Evaluator is going to solve it. I really don't think so. And I think there should be other reasons why you become a Credentialed Evaluator. I think there's so much value in using the competencies to guide your career development, so much value in being committed to always improve your competencies. But I've had a lot of people over the years that contact me and ask if I think they should become a Credentialed Evaluator. My answer is that it will always depend. I think it has a lot of value for some people, but I don't think it's the best thing for everyone. And there's a few things that I wish I had considered before I got mine. Because I have to admit that every year that I have to renew my designation, I am conflicted and I have dilemmas. I really wish that I had considered the things I'm going to share next when I made that decision over 3 years ago. The first thing worth noting is if you're committed to the field of evaluation, if you have doubts on whether you're going to stay within the field, you should consider that if you become a Credentialed Evaluator, in order to keep it up, you will need to be a member of the Canadian Evaluation Society every year, in perpetuity within your career. So if you're not sure whether you're going to be an evaluator, then I'm not sure that the Credentialed Evaluator designation is necessarily going to be relevant for you throughout your career. Another thing that I think is worth considering is whether you just want to support the Canadian Evaluation Society. And if that is the case, and you know that this is how you're going to feel throughout your career, like 10 years from now, then I think it's a good idea to become a credentialed evaluator, regardless of the cost and any of the other considerations. Because the Canadian Evaluation Society is an amazing organization, almost fully run by volunteers, and you do need money in order to sustain these organizations. Becoming a credentialed evaluator is a great way of giving back to your professional community, and specifically to the Canadian Evaluation Society. It can elevate the profile and understanding of what evaluation is within your organization. And of course, you'd also need to do a little bit of work around this as well. There's always that education component included, but I think it can give you good language. It gives you good credibility and backup to have those discussions. If you are in consulting and you work in Canada, I think it's becoming more and more recognized. I'm seeing more opportunities that list having a credentialed evaluator as an asset. And I'm seeing jobs that are starting to describe the credentialed evaluator designation as an asset. This indicates that awareness of the designation is growing and that therefore there's preference for people that have this. I have to be honest as well. If I am hiring for a senior evaluation role and I see an applicant that has the credentialed evaluator designation, I will want to talk to them more. I will almost guaranteed I will interview them because I am familiar with the process. I know the requirements. So just having that to me indicates that they're likely going to be able to meet the requirements of the position. I'm not necessarily going to hire them, but I will want to talk to them more. Some people have asked me whether they should get the designation if they live outside Canada. And to this I say, probably not. I would recommend that you connect with professionals in the region where you want to work. Start by asking them, do you know what the Credentialed Evaluator Designation Program is? Before you even say, should I do this? Because if they don't know about it, then they can't really answer the question either. But knowing if there's awareness of it is a good first step. Connect with evaluator professionals in the region you want to work in. See what the discourse is within the organizations that hire evaluators. From my perspective, awareness of this is only starting to grow in Canada, so I would find it rare that there's organizations outside Canada that would think that the credentialed evaluator designation is an asset or that would even recognize that. And if people are not going to recognize it, then there's no much point in you having the title. Like I could come up with a program called Maria Montenegro Evaluators for the World, but if there's no credibility and awareness around that program, it really is going to mean absolutely nothing when you put that title in your resume. So that's also something you want to consider. Another thing that I wish I would have considered when I was becoming a credentialed evaluator is this whole discourse and debate around the credentialing process. One of the things that I'm very passionate about is making evaluation more accessible and helping people build rewarding careers in evaluation. I do think there's some merit to the arguments against this type of program because there's a cost associated with applying to become one and also to maintaining it. So it can create barriers for other people to practice. I think if I had known about these debates and other equity conversations within our field when I was applying to become a credentialed evaluator, I'm not sure if I would have made the decision of becoming one. Considering where you stand in these debates around credentialization is also important if you want to be in true alignment with your values. And the last thing that I'm going to discuss is the cost. This is something that I really wish I would have considered before applying. I'm going to provide a bit of an overview of the costs, but once again, really encourage you to go to the website and read the latest details and most accurate information in the Canadian Evaluation Society website. To apply for the designation program, as of April 2025, the cost is 485 Canadian dollars. Once you become a credentialed evaluator, to maintain the designation, you have to be a member of the society. The cost is 200 Canadian dollars. And you have to pay a renewal fee for the Credentialed Evaluator designation, which is 50 Canadian dollars. When I applied to become a Credentialed Evaluator, I knew the cost, like I had seen the cost on the website. I was willing to pay the cost and in a privileged position to be able to do it. But what I didn't consider was whether I was going to have support by my employer every year to cover the costs. 2, whether I was going to want to be a member of the Canadian Evaluation Society for the rest of my career and be able to actually pay these costs, again, every year. It does cost money. And you may be in an organization right now, and maybe your employer right now would support this, and it doesn't seem like such a big deal, but maybe you're not, or maybe things can change. Like for me, for example, I'm not receiving any support from my organization for any of my costs related to memberships of these organizations or renewal of my Credentialed Evaluator designation. So all of this has to come out of my pocket. And although it might not seem a lot to pay $250 every year to renew this, and although it's great to support your professional organization, there's always opportunity cost to your money. Just to give you an idea, over a 10-year period, if we use a conservative annual return, you could invest this money at 7%, and the application fee plus the annual costs could grow more than $4,600. That is quite a lot of money. I can think of so many things I can do with that money, including attending in-person conferences, doing training that I want to do, or supporting my retirement plans. And this is the part of the episode that I'm the most conflicted about. I think it's important to support our professional organizations. There's costs in running every organization, and most of the work done in the Canadian Evaluation Society and even in the group that manages and runs the credentialing process is done on a voluntary basis. I'm so thankful for people that spend so much of their time and energy in creating programs like this, because the Canadian Evaluation Society and these type of organizations have played such a big role in my career and my identity as an evaluator. At the same time, I have finite resources, like many of you do. I always consider what the best use of my money is. And I also not only consider the amount, but I consider the value for my money. What am I getting in return? And the reality is that there's so many things that I want to do. There's trainings I want to attend. There's pre-conference workshops that look great. There's other organizations within evaluation that I want to be a member of and that may or may not bring me more value. What I'm trying to say is that I wish I had considered all of this when I was applying to become a Credentialed Evaluator. I wish I had sat and taken the time to really assess what benefit am I receiving from my current membership? What benefit do I foresee receiving for the next 10 and 20 years? Because that's what we're talking about, right? We're talking about the rest of our career. And then made a decision that was financially informed as well. And I think that brings me to answering the question in the title of the episode. Would I do it again? With all of the information that I have now, would I make the same decision and become a Credentialed Evaluator? I'm very conflicted. I don't think that I would have had the motivation to work through my competencies and the tools to communicate my goals, which really helped me in my career, if it wasn't because I was working towards becoming a Credentialed Evaluator. And I have to be fair because I think those things were so instrumental in helping me get where I am today. I also wonder if some of the few contracts that I have received in the last few years, in some part or another, were influenced by my Credentialed Evaluator title. I'll also have to see in the future if when I release my coaching services, there's clients that decide to work with me because of my title. But I am conflicted. I'm conflicted because I know there's people that cannot afford this. I know there's people that don't receive support from their employers. And they might be losing out on opportunities because they don't have this now or perhaps in the future as the awareness of this designation increases. For now, I'm a Credentialed Evaluator and I'm thankful for what it has done to my career. I'll continue to debate these questions as my career moves forward every year when I have to renew my designation until I stop being conflicted and I decide one way or another. If you're trying to decide if this is the next step for you, I hope that this episode has given you some other things to think about as you're trying to make that decision. And if you're still feeling a little bit conflicted about this, I have developed a quick decision aid tool with 5 questions that I wish I had asked myself when I was in the process of applying for this designation. And you can access it in my website following the instructions in the episode notes. If you do decide to move forward, enjoy the process. Celebrate when you get the designation. It's such a big milestone. And if you have a chance of running into some of the many wonderful people that have given so much of their time and energy into this program and into other efforts around the world to professionalize evaluation, thank them. Because thanks to them, our field has advanced so much. And most of them, if not all, are doing this on a volunteer basis, which I think is something that we should all be inspired by.